Lords, Friends, welcome to Central United Methodist Church. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Rob Blackburn, the senior pastor here at Central Church. We're glad you're with us this morning. The great thing about Central Church, it's a lot bigger than this big, beautiful building. It represents the people who worship here every week, who serve in many ways in this community, and those of you that are joining us in your homes this morning. By belonging to Christ, we belong to one another. I hope that you will sense that belonging as we worship today. Peace and grace to you all.
The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God our Father, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Good morning, and welcome to Central United Methodist Church. We are glad that you are here. I want to draw your attention just to a few announcements. There's an insert. It's kind of a folded insert. Oh, put light on me. There's an insert in your bulletin. The Asheville Choral Festival will be held in the sanctuary of First Presbyterian Church on Friday, October 18th. At 7 p.m. featuring our choir, Trinity Episcopal's choir, and First Pres's choir. And we're really excited to be a part of that and would love for you all to come out for that. Pastor Lisa is leading a Bible study this month in the Library Welcome Center between services. So if you're looking for a place to plug in between services, would love for you to be a part of that. You'll notice as you open the insert, there's a big insert for our ministry fair. Next Sunday morning between services, all morning, we'll have our ministry fair. This is a great place to find somewhere to plug in, somewhere to be a part of. There are also announcements about other Sunday school classes, Congregations for Children, and New Member Sunday on October 27th. There's a lot going on. Also, our Lumberton team is in Lumberton right now, so we continue to pray for them this morning. So there's a lot going on at Central. Find a place. There's more on our website. There's more online, and we'd love for you to plug in. Now, in the month of October, we're preaching on the contemplative stance, and last week, Rob preached on showing up. And this week, Patrick is preaching on paying attention. So I invite you to take a deep breath, to be fully present here this morning as we worship and pay attention to what God has for us. Let us prepare our hearts for worship. join me in the affirmation of faith that's found in your bulletin. Let us affirm our faith. We are not alone. We live in God's world. We believe in God, who has created and is creating, who has come in Jesus, the Word made flesh, to reconcile and make new, who works in us and others by the Spirit. We trust in God. We are called to be the church, to celebrate God's presence, to love and serve others, to seek justice and resist evil, to proclaim Jesus, crucified and risen, our judge and our hope. In life, in death, in life beyond death, God is with us. We are not alone. Thanks be to God. Amen.
This summer, I had the opportunity to go on the youth mission trip to Memphis, Tennessee. The mission trip is called Collide, and yes, it was like my world and the cultural opportunities that Collide provided come together. We serve people experiencing homelessness and poverty-stricken children, youth, and elderly. One of the service projects was volunteering at the soup kitchen. At the soup kitchen, we helped to prepare and serve a meal to the hungry. I, along with Central Youth, served drinks, cut up apples, and made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. After the service project, we gathered with the other youth groups at Collide. We worshiped together and attended a small group session that was led by Andrew Mockery and other youth leaders. During small groups, we talked about what our group experienced that day, discussed the worship service we had attended, and did getting to know you activities. Each night, we ate a meal provided by a different culture. My favorite meal was the Ethiopian meal. The youth and adults ate with small pieces of bread instead of utensils. We took our bread and scooped up the food that was in a large dish in the middle of the table. I ate lamb for the first time that night. That week at Collide, we were exposed to other cultures such as Venezuelan, Honduran, Yemeni, and Syrian. As you can see, this was not your normal youth mission trip. It was a life-changing experience. I met a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. Here are two that really touched my heart. Their names were Zion and Chance. When we got to the work site, Zion and Chance were playing basketball, so my friends and I went over and played with them. At first, one of the boys did not want to tell us his name, but when we started to get to know each other a little better, we learned his name was Zion. For the rest of the day, we got to play basketball in the gym. When it was time to go, Zion and Chance asked if we would be back the next day. When he asked me this, I didn't really know what to say at first, but when I got up the courage to tell these 7-year-old boys that we couldn't come back the next day. When I told him this, he gave me the biggest hug, and we got a picture together. This is Zion and Chance. I will always remember these two boys. I will never forget the impact on us all when our worlds collided.
Prayer is something we do all the time. Prayer is something that we do every week here at Central, and we have groups that pray over your prayer requests. So I invite you now to place your prayer requests in the offering plate. You'll find the cards in front of you. Or if you're worshiping with us online or think of something during the week, please submit your prayer requests online. Those emails come directly to me, and I can add those to our lists. Will you bow your heads with me now? Gracious and ever-present God, how can we imagine with our human minds that you have been before time and creation itself? Even now, you are holding together time and space and existence with nothing more than your will, power beyond our comprehension. Your Spirit moves in the world to usher in your kingdom, and at the same time envelops us in the comfort of your peace. Your Son took on flesh and came into the world to live among all your children and die in the ultimate act of love and forgiveness. You are all this and so much more. And we, your creation, still lose sight of you, God. We make plans and set goals and take pleasure in our accomplishments and disregard the source of all our gifts. Or on the flip side, we try to hide, avoiding the threat of failure, frozen by fear, disconnected from the hope you would offer. O Lord, we come to you in prayer to lay aside dependence on ourselves and to renew our trust in you. Here we are not distracted by self-accomplishment or self-sufficiency or even by fear. No, surrounded by this community of believers and connected to one another and to you in prayer, we are focused and attentive to our God. In prayer, we are like Elijah at the mountain, seeking you in all, finding you in silence. In silence, we now lay our troubles at your feet. You know our sorrows. We grieve, we struggle with illness, we are weary and worn down. You know our fears. You hear our prayers with unconditional love, offer forgiveness, and call us back to partnership with you, guided by your Spirit. You give us strength to walk alongside ones who need love and support. You give us grace, for which the only response is to reflect that love and grace to others. You, even the God of all creation, you know us so well. We are your grateful children. And as such, we join our voices together with the words that Jesus taught the first disciples, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen.
Forward. Hey, buddy. How you doing? Good. There's some more coming on the side. Here we go. Hi. Good morning. So I don't know if you know this. You might know this, but this month is Stewardship Month. Do you know what that means? No, yeah, that's just kind of a big fancy word. So every October, we actually do what's called stewardship. And during that time, we commit to money that we're going to give to the church for the year so that the church can do a lot of services and programs for the people in our community. So we do it every single October. And you might think, well, stewardship's probably for adults because you as kids probably don't have that much money, right? You might have a little bit. You might have some birthday money saved up or some money from like allowance or anything. So what would stewardship have to do when you don't have as much money to give? Well, you could maybe give $1 or $2 from your money, or you could also give in a different way. You could lend a helping hand to somebody who needs it. You could offer some kind words or a kind gesture when you see somebody who maybe looks sad. But the thing that you would have to do to that is to be intentional, to pay attention to the people around you and say, hey, that person hasn't smiled in a while. Maybe I'll smile at them. And that would be a good way that we can give back to our community, even when we can't maybe give as much money as we would like to. So now we're going to do something kind of interesting. We're going to stand up and we're going to walk around the church, the sanctuary. So I'm going to give you each a card, and I'm going to have my acolytes help me out with this a little too. I want you to give one of these cards to as many people as you can in our church right here in the sanctuary. These are stewardship cards. These are commitment cards that people are going to fill out and say how much money they want to give this year. So we're going to help out by giving them these cards. So I'm going to pass these out to you. So go ahead and pass these around. So let's stand up. I'll go with you. We'll do it together. And go and walk up and down the aisles, maybe go up to the choir. Let me have my acolytes come and help. Yeah, there you go. So walk around and hand these out, and then you can, when you run out of cards, come back up here and we'll sit back down. But yeah, pass these out. Make sure everybody can get one. If there's anyone who needs one, be sure to raise your hand. Our lovely volunteers will be happy to hand them out to you. You want me to start flinging them back here? You want some more? Oh, perfect. So excited. All right, awesome. So as you're getting these cards, you can check out our really awesome graphic. And these are just ways that you can fill out. Do you want some more? Do you think you need some more? Awesome. All right. So you can pass them out to people. Hold on. Why don't you go up there? Do you want some more? All right, raise your hand if you didn't get a card. If your hand's raised, friends, go pass them out. There's some on the other side, so you may have to yeah, be sure to give one to Rob too. There we go. There we go. Oh, Patrick got 2. Double commitment. Is that everyone? Oh, look, there's some people over here. So go on this side and give them to the people standing up. Whoops. Here, grab these. I'll pick them up. Awesome. All right, go take them over there. There's some people with their hands raised. Anyone else who still needs a card? All right, so we're coming for you down this way. All right, you want to take some more? Okay, so there's some people back in the very back who might need it. All right. Of course. All right, let's give our lovely children a round of applause for being so helpful this morning. Awesome. All right, any extras you have, just bring them up here. And at this time, we will go ahead and just do our dismissal. So if there's any kiddos who want to come with me to Children's Church, they can. You're welcome to stay seated here with your families. Anyone who is nursery aged will need to be taken down to the nursery, and I can show you where that is if you need help. Thank you.
That's some good energy. Speaking of energy, the 19th chapter of 1 Kings is filled with it. It's not Elijah running towards someone or to do something as much as he's running away. He's running from Jezebel. And I pick up the story in the 9th verse of that 19th chapter. At that place he came to a cave. He spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they're seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out, stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord.
But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake, and after the earthquake a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle, went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they're seeking my life to take it away." Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram." It's the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
My name's been on the schedule to preach this second week in October since probably the early summer. That's when we get the schedule together, but we don't know what we're going to talk about yet. We don't always have a theme, but we kind of have the bones. Who's going to be talking during what month and when? And so when we began to plan our next sermon series, we decided for this stewardship month to examine, like Luke said this morning, on the fourfold contemplative stance, this stance of living our lives. And it was laid out by the former dean of Duke Divinity, Elaine Heath. And she says it this way: show up, pay attention, cooperate with God, and release the outcome. Now, I know I serve a God with a sense of humor because the theme for this second week of preaching is pay attention. These two words have probably been said to me more times than any other two words in my life. I heard "I love you" a lot, which I was thankful for, but a lot of times pay attention came right after, like, "I love you, Patrick, but please pay attention." You know, I was always a good student or a teammate. I tried to work hard. I tried to be fair and nice and funny, but I always seemed to find something else to focus on. I was a little bit like that dog in the movie Up, you know, that Pixar movie? And they give a collar to the dog so the dog can talk, and he's talking to his owner. "Oh, I'm so thankful you gave me this collar, and now I can tell you how much I love you." Squirrel. He just blips off into a different place as if he can't focus on the task at hand. As a child playing soccer, when the ball would go to the other end of the field, I would maybe pick up flowers. Or if there was a loose thread on the bottom of my shorts, I would fiddle with that until the coach, who happened to be my father, was yelling from the sideline, "Heads up, the ball is coming. Pay attention, Patrick. Please pay attention." Or better yet, during the standardized testing at school, I would get home. My mother, who has been an educator for many years, would say, "Patrick, how did the test go?" Expecting me to tell her, well, this was what we talked about today. This is how I felt like I did. But instead, I would say, "Well, you know, the bathrooms were really clean today. And I enjoyed going to the clean bathrooms." Or I would say, "Well, I tried to finish as quick as possible because the teacher said I could draw whatever I liked if I finished fast enough." So, of course, she and my teachers were hoping that I would pay attention. Paying attention is not necessarily my strong suit. And this is kind of strange because my mother is exceedingly attentive. You know, she notices the smallest little details. And these guys can tell you, she'll send me a text between services. I'll probably have one today. "Hi, Mom." And she'll say, "Hey, that was great this morning, but you should maybe fix your tie." Or she'll say, "Tell Luke I really enjoyed his haircut," or "Rob had a really great sermon illustration this morning." You can see which one her favorite is. But she's always paying attention. There are other people in my life that pay attention. I told you 2 weeks ago about how attentive my wife Hannah is when we're on hikes. She notices all of the little miracles of growth around us. And yet, here we are with the person whose focus pales in comparison to the others, talking to you this morning about paying attention. So take that as you will. God is humorous. But God's love and grace are always popping up in new and unimaginable ways. We've been talking about this with our little Kairos moments. Our days are punctuated by these little moments of light and love, those small Kairos moments. But how many of them go unnoticed? How many of them go unnoticed? You see, some researchers are saying that in this day and age, we have an attention span that at maximum, can give us 30 minutes of uninterrupted focus. And I know what you're saying, well, I watch shows on Netflix all the time and they're 45 minutes long, but what they're saying is uninterrupted focus. You don't look at the clock, you don't check your phone, you don't get up to make popcorn. Uninterrupted focus. 30 minutes, that's it. That's about our maximum. But the stat that I found the most compelling was that it takes an additional 23 minutes and 15 seconds to come back to the task we were focused on before. So if we get taken out of the task, it takes 23 minutes to come back to focus. But don't hear that and be discouraged, because we serve a God whose grace is poured out with a liberal hand. There's always another moment, always another instance, always another little piece to pay attention to. God's love is breaking into our daily lives. That's the beauty of grace, my friends. But we do have to be alert. We have to show up and pay attention to the constant and persistent love of an ever-present God. So God is always showing up in new and unexpected ways, and that is where we find the prophet Elijah this week. This prophet is familiar with God, but he's always on the lookout to see where this familiar God will pop up. At this point in the book of Kings, Elijah has challenged the prophets of Baal to a contest to see whose God is superior. So they get together, 450 prophets of Baal and one prophet for Yahweh, Elijah. They each take a bull, they construct a large altar, they sacrifice the bull, they place it on the altar, and then the challenge is set. Call upon your Lord and see if they can burn this bull as a sacrifice. So the prophets of Baal, all 450 of them, get together and they pray all day, well into the afternoon, shrieking to their Lord, cutting themselves, hoping that the bull will be burned up. And Elijah does what any good prophet does. He begins to goad them. He makes fun of them for their God not showing up. And then he says, I'll do you one better. And he covers the altar with water, 5 gallons of it. And then he says a simple prayer to Yahweh. And his bull is consumed. And not just the bull, but the fire is so hot that it consumes the wood on the altar and all the rocks that it's made of. And then Elijah turns to these prophets of Baal, says to the people gathered who are watching, round them up and kill them. Well, this really upset Queen Jezebel. Queen Jezebel was King Ahab's wife. She's the one that mandated that the state religion now be the worship of Baal. And she was so frustrated with Elijah, she declared, I'm going to have this man killed. Even if it means eternal damnation from his God, Elijah will die. So, Elijah, being smart, flees to the wilderness. And he survives only because angels of the Lord bring him food and water. And he walks for 40 days and 40 nights until he reaches Mount Horeb. Now, Mount Horeb is better known as Mount Sinai. You've heard of this mountain. And there Elijah finds a cave to hide in. And it is there on that holy mountain that God tells Elijah, wait, for my presence will pass by. Now first comes an intense wind, and this wind is so strong that it shatters the rock and it moves the earth. And then comes an earthquake, one that is so strong that it shakes the foundations of the earth. And finally, an intense fire much like the one that burned up the altar. But Elijah does not see or feel or perceive the presence of the Lord in any of these mighty acts. It's only after these grandiose gestures, these traditional modes of divine communication, that in the mundane, the ordinary, the sound of sheer silence. Some translations say a gentle blowing, or my favorite, a delicate whisper. And a delicate whisper that Elijah gets up and is moved back to action, that he perceives the Lord in the delicate whisper. It's according to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's famous protagonist, Sherlock Holmes, that there is nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact. There's nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact. You see, Sherlock was only called in to pick up the slack when a case had kind of gone cold, when we had run out all the leads, when all the facts seemed to be obvious and we couldn't figure out where to go. He was a master at paying attention to all the small details in a case. And one that is my favorite is called The Silver Blaze, and I often read it when we're on long road trips. I read it to my wife, Hannah, and I love this. You see, this was a case about a horse that had gone missing, and all the leads had run out. It seems as if the stable was blown open, the stable boy had been drugged at dinner time, and now we can't find this horse. And so it had been a cold case. All the facts seemed very obvious. The horse must have just escaped. The horse must have just escaped. And as time goes on, they're wondering, how is this masterful detective Sherlock Holmes going to bust the case open? And he begins to talk out loud to his assistant Watson, and he says, I don't want to call this case the case of the Silver Blaze. I want to call it the curious case of the dog in the nighttime. Dr. Watson says, well, that's interesting because the dog didn't do anything in the nighttime. The dog was silent that night. And Sherlock says, that's what's so curious about this case. You see, everyone else had neglected to see that the dog would have barked if a stranger came into the barn to release the horse. But Sherlock couldn't accept all of the facts that had been there. He couldn't allow previous perceptions to shape and inform his current outcome. So he knew he had to stay fully immersed. He had to pay attention to every little thing going on, even if it was so much as the silence of a dog. God is humorous like that, wily, always showing up, spiking into our everyday lives in new, unexpected ways, and we have to have eyes to see. You see, at Mount Sinai, God had showed up in wind, earthquake, and fire before. When Moses came up on that mountain after a frustrating experience with the golden calf, he was hid in a cave on Mount Sinai, a little cleft in the rock, and the presence and glory of God boomed all around him, in the wind, the earthquake, the fire, the lightning, all around him. Elijah must have known this. He had to be discerning. He had to pay attention to the new ways in which God was present and speaking. I mean, just a few chapters earlier, Elijah had encountered God in fire right there in front of the prophets of Baal. He knew the stories of Moses. He knew the power of God and how God showed up in the world. But he also knew that God was elusive, wily, ever loving, and ever changing in response to humanity. So it was at this point in his ministry when Elijah was tired, scared, and burned out, it would have been easy to just rely on how God had showed up before in the past. But he knew how important it was to show up and pay attention, to try to see how God was working in the world and how God was calling him to work in the world. So after this, after perceiving the still small silence, not being distracted by things that he had known before, but constantly looking for God with new eyes, that Elijah went and continued to prophesy, cooperating with what God had called him to do, trusting that it was his calling. It's so easy to become distracted by loud, shiny, and beautiful things. I do it all the time. It's so easy to fall into old patterns of recognition, or to pray the same prayers or read the same scriptures. It's so easy to find the things that are familiar to us. Well, God always shows up in the fire. God always shows up when I sing this song. But to show up in every moment, every instant, with an openness, a childlike innocence, and an attentiveness to what God is doing in the world, that takes a little bit of practice. And that's what the contemplative stance is all about. It's not about perfection. It's about progress. It's not a checklist with a gold star or a certificate upon your completion. It's about putting ourselves into a position by showing up and witnessing what God is doing in the world. It's about taking our attentiveness, taking our desire to know God, to pursue God, our desire to listen to new thoughts about God that are unlike our own, and paying careful attention to how they make us feel, and responding by cooperating with what God is doing in the world and knowing that the outcome is in God's good hands. Now, I haven't fully figured out the paying attention piece. I've tried really hard. I'm working on it. Over this last month, I've tried diligently to take time every day to pray 5 times a day. This is outside of my comfort zone. To try to focus on the world around me, to see the leaves as they change. And another thing is I'm trying to listen even more carefully when mentors preach, not only to draw on the wisdom of Scripture that they use, but to listen to the theologians and writers that shape them. I try to pay attention to who they're using, to glean just a little bit of that knowledge. And one of Rob's favorites is Frederick Buechner. He was a prolific writer, speaker, he's still alive, and preacher. And Buechner says that his favorite part of going on tour, he goes on all these tours all across the country, is giving lectures. But it can be pretty easy to burn out when you're on a lecture tour. You go, you begin to say the same things every night. So the only thing that keeps it kind of fresh for Fred is the call and response afterwards. He invites the crowd that's gathered, and he says, ask any question you want, and I'll give an answer. And if I don't have an answer, I'll make one up. But he says that he begins to get similar questions, and that the one that he gets the most often, the one that's become his favorite, is this. And he says, if you had to sum up in one relatively short sentence what you've been trying to say in all of your writings over the years, what would you say? So they're asking Frederick Buechner to take all of his writings and basically sum it up in one sentence, a tall task. But this is how Buechner would respond. He says, listen to your life. Pay attention to what happens to you. Listen to your life. Pay attention to what happens to you. And Buechner says this because, and he goes on by saying, if there is a God that's concerned with the world, which I believe there is, if we believe in a God that was concerned enough to enter this world, to live in this world, to work in this world, to live, die, and rise again in this world, if God is truly involved in this world, then one of the most powerful ways he speaks to us is through what happens to us. So Buechner says, keep your ears open and keep your eyes open for the often hidden, elusive word of God. That's why I love this season. That's why I love the fall. You see, I didn't get this season growing up in Texas. We had 2 seasons. There was summer for a long period of time. There was one day of fall, and then there was a stretch of winter, and then we went immediately back to summer. So it's been a new experience to actually have the season of fall. I have to keep my eyes open to everything that's changing around me. I love watching the trees as they change color, and some change really quickly as if they're as excited as I am, and others are a bit more reluctant, but they all come around. But my most favorite part of the fall is when the leaves finally begin to all hit the ground and the trees begin to be sparse, because the similar views of my commute, they change. I'm so used to driving in on autopilot. We talk about that wasted time. But as I drive now, everything around me has taken on a new shape. As the leaves aren't there, you see new ridges that you've never seen before. Maybe a house set back on a hill, forgotten by the ages, or a little creek. It's easy to miss all of this beauty as we kind of travel along through life on autopilot. We miss God's handiwork, past and present. But as the leaves change around me, it's as if God is saying with every falling of the leaf in a delicate whisper, pay attention. Pay attention to what I'm doing in the world around you. And that's why I love the fall. And Mary Oliver, one of my favorite poems, describes a similar experience to this. And she wrote an essay and a collection of essays called Upstream. And this was published right before she passed. And Upstream was the title of the work, but it was also the title of one essay in the book. And it describes a day during the fall where she went to a mountain stream with her parents. She walked upstream. She kept going and going. Her parents stayed downstream, and she walked farther and farther away from them, but she never got scared. She was comforted by the world around her as if her eyes were opened for the first time to see what God was doing in the world. She was amazed by the beauty, the majesty, and the stillness of it all. She said that as she walked home that day, walking back downstream, she felt like she never really went home, that her home was there in God's creation. And so she urged her readers, recapture your childlike eyes, be amazed at the world around you. And she ends her essay with this short sentence: attention is the beginning of devotion. Attention is the beginning of devotion. May it be so. hear this benediction from the poet Wendell Berry. The incarnate Word is with us, is still speaking, is present always, yet leaves no sign, but everything that is. Go in peace.
This concludes the early morning worship service at Central United Methodist Church located at 27 Church Street in downtown Asheville, North Carolina. Thank you for joining us. We invite you to worship in person with us. A contemporary worship service is held Saturday evenings at 6 p.m. Traditional services are held Sunday mornings at 8:45 and 10:55. For more information, visit our website at centralumc.org or call the church office at 253-3316.